Hey, Brandon, in the last couple of weeks, it seems like you were in a lot of different places. Where did you go to games?
This past week I went down to New Orleans for the Sugar Bowl. Um,
Will you talk about that for a second?
yeah. I woke, I was planning on sleeping in that morning. I think like a lot of people in New Orleans, and I got a call from my boss asking if I was okay. It woke me up, and I was like, yeah. I immediately thought he was thinking like Brandon must be drunk. Because like I thought he was asking me if I was hungover. But no, he's like, no, are you okay? There was a terrorist attack in New Orleans last night, and I immediately shot out of bed and like ran over to my window because I didn't know what that meant. And then he filled me on the details, and he said, you don't really need to go out and go cover that, so to speak, but look into the game, see if the game's still going on and everything. So I got up, went down for breakfast, and found out there was going to be like a press conference at the police headquarters. So I just said, screw it, I'm gonna go down there. Went down there, did some reporting, ran into a congressman, ran into the sheriff of Orleans Parish. And then we had a press conference, I think at 1 o'clock. But during that time, a lot of information was starting to leak about the game, whether it was going to be played, if it was going to be delayed. And it was a weird scene just because it was the FBI was there, Homeland Security was there, obviously the police force was there. About 400 police officers were on the streets at that point. The place was just crawling with uniformed officers.
Yeah, and then they delayed the game, which obviously was not the most important part of that day, but still a lot of moving parts, right? And I would think it may even be easier to delay it a week than a day. Like, I don't know, you were a part of that situation. Like, when did they make that decision, and what did they do differently in that 1 day time? Did they like bring in people to make it more secure?
Yeah, so I guess about like 7.5, 8 hours before the game was supposed to kick off, they made the decision to delay it 1 day. And they still hadn't set a time. They just said 24 hours. And so at that point, that started leaking, and then they finally confirmed it right after 1 o'clock local time. And a lot of fans were scheduled to leave that next day, fly out and everything. So a lot of fans did leave. The attendance for the game only ended up being 57,000 something and change, and the capacity there is well over 70,000. It was still a great atmosphere, but a lot of people just had to go home because of travel. Interestingly, all the airlines decided to refund tickets or whatever, give them travel credits for free, no cancellation fees if they had to do anything out of New Orleans. So a lot of fans were able to stay as a result of that, just financially. But I talked to several families and stuff at team hotels about it, and some of them just didn't feel like safe staying there. But it was incredible just how much more security was in that city, less than 12 hours after that attack happened. I mean, Canal Street, which is where I was staying on, which is right off Bourbon Street. I was about 1,100 feet away from where the attack happened. It was just, you couldn't get anywhere without seeing a police officer about every 2 seconds in your field of view. And sirens were going off everywhere. And I guess what was so really, really crazy about all of it, such a tragic situation, obviously just terrible, was that in the morning hours, they were telling everybody to stay indoors because they were still sweeping the city for explosives. They didn't know if there were other explosives in the city. And so they were telling everybody to stay in. And meanwhile, I left my hotel room, obviously, to go to that press conference. And, there was a lot of people just walking around the streets like it was a normal day. And, that's just New Orleans for you. You can't slow people down there, whether tourists or locals. But, that I can't imagine the pain that everybody's going through in that city because it's so resilient anyway. That's kind of in its DNA. It's New Orleans. It's a crescent city. It's a big easy. It's party all the time. It never sleeps. But you could tell like later that afternoon when everything started settling in, people were kind of shaken up a little bit about it. Not as many people on the streets as you would expect.
Did they do anything security at the game, or they're like metal detectors or anything when you got there? That, again, because they only had a day. That's why I thought it would be harder to get it flipped over in a day than a couple days or even more than that. What about when you got there?
Yeah, they upped security. I mean, they had a lot more officers there. I saw Homeland Security there. I saw FBI agents there, special agents with Homeland Security, and then of course the police force. They had bomb dogs outside sniffing every vehicle that was parking in the parking garage, as well as any team buses or even media buses that were coming up. So we had to like stand on the bus for about 5 minutes as the dog was going around. Metal detectors at the entrances, Nothing like too out of the ordinary as far as like just going through the entrances. Because if you go to games now anywhere, really, and everybody knows this, it's like security's pretty amped up anyway with metal detectors and people, all that stuff. So, for the media, it took us maybe 5 minutes to get through security, which wasn't too outrageous, but it was a very good thing to see, especially the canine officers. And then when you walk through the stadium, I mean, it was, I don't know how many law enforcement were there, but it was substantial because I've never been in a college football game where I've seen the FBI and Homeland Security just walking around among the crowd.
With Mardi Gras and then the Super Bowl in February, you were just there as that happened. Would you think twice about being a part of one of those events in New Orleans?
Personally, yes, because I mean, but the thing is, it's just like any big city is going to have security issues anyway. You can't keep an eye on everything at any time. And because of the way New Orleans is structured, all the small streets, side streets, and everything, I mean, it's pretty much just foot traffic anyway. So, like, anybody can come and go. And with that attack, the big question there was the security measures as far as just the bollards, the security bollards that would go up at the end of Bourbon Street or some of these party roads, I would call them, where people can just walk on the roads, like Bourbon Street. And those security bollards are just like if you go to the shopping mall or whatever, you see those metal posts, like yellow posts or whatever, in the parking lot. They're like those, but they raise up out of the ground. They can come up and down. And they also have these things almost called, they're like a wall, almost called like, it looks like a snow plow that comes out of the ground as well at the end of the road, so no one can get through it. But those bollards, the smaller ones, are supposed to be on the sidewalks that come up. So they're staggered. So you have like one here and then one here behind it. And so if someone was to try and drive a car through there, there's absolutely no way for them to do it. But the issue there is that New Orleans, they've been under repair since November and they weren't working. And so they've had to put temporary structures up, whether it's just one of those metal steel gates that you see like at, boxing events or old wrestling events in the 80s, or they'll park a police car at the end of the street and just kind of block it with their car. And obviously they didn't have anything really on the sidewalk to stop this attacker this past week. So they say they're going to have this all fixed before the Super Bowl. But I mean, you can't be safe really anywhere these days. And personally, as I get older, I just want to avoid large events unless it's work related. But it would definitely be in the back of my mind if I were to go to New Orleans and go to one of these big events. And for that matter, any big event in any city, but probably especially New Orleans, because as I said, there's just so many little small roads and nook and crannies around the French Quarter that, you just never know what's going to happen there. Plus, as you know, Bobby, you walk around. Every time I'm in New Orleans, I hear stories about people getting mugged or getting followed around or whatever, because it's such a hot spot for tourists and the pickpockets are always looking out for you.
Yeah, and in drunk cities too, it's easier to. If I were a pickpocket, I go to drunk cities because people are drunk.
No clue.
Let's talk about that game specifically. I was talking about Parker Jones for a second. So, and again, we can get to the game, but first of all, if I'm a walk-on, I'm not getting right on the sideline anyway because I don't deserve to be, and I feel like they're going to be like, "Hey, walk-on, move back." Like, I feel like I would just know my place. Aside from his toes are a little over the line, he hit the referee wiped out, threw the flag. He's a walk-on. Don't wear such a bold white undershirt. I thought that was problematic too. Why are you drawing attention to yourself, walk-on? All those thoughts happened. Now, what are your thoughts about the Parker Jones situation as a whole? Should the ref have thrown the flag? The reaction? Does he transfer? What do you think about that, Brandon?
Well, I can see why the ref threw the flag because it's against the rules, but also if it's one of those situations where it didn't necessarily affect the play and it also didn't affect your involvement with the play as a referee, you had other officials to help you, I probably wouldn't have thrown the flag. Also, I'm sure if he looked at the replay of it, he would have seen how much of an accident it was. It wasn't like the kid was legitimately like 3 feet into the white zone, along the sideline. He was just there on the edge, and it was just a huge play, and it was the first big play of the game for either side, really. And so everybody was excited. I feel bad for the kid just because, I was there in the stadium, but I had the broadcast on my computer on the side or whatever. And every time I looked down, it looked like they were still talking about the kid over and over and over again. They were making him a superstar without him really wanting to be a superstar. And it's part of the problem or part of what you sign up for as a football player, but not necessarily as a walk-on football player. The other thing is that because of these playoffs, now you're able to dress out everybody who's on your roster. So like 105, 125 kids or whatever. Whereas if it was like a typical road game during the season, you'd only have like 60 something players on the sideline. So that walk on would have never been there. But because of the playoff, they allow you to travel your entire roster. And I'll tell you, it was so many kids for Georgia that a lot of their walk-ons were in the press conference room because I was having to do some TV before the game. And it's the only quiet area I could find. But then it wasn't because there was about 25, 30 walk-ons in there getting dressed out for the game because they didn't have enough room in their locker room, an NFL locker room of all things too. So they should maybe they should just look at like not allowing that many kids on the sideline. I know they want the kids to have the experience and reward them for being there at the game, but that doesn't necessarily mean they need to be on the sideline for the game and getting in the way. So maybe we cut back on that and just for that 3-hour period of time, they're not with the team, but the rest of the week they are and they're enjoying the festivities.
I did a deep dive on him. I think most people did. He was a no-star recruit. How do you even get on as a walk-on at Georgia as a no-star recruit? Do you know anything about his story?
None. I didn't really look into him all that much, but sometimes it's just a matter of you know somebody who knows somebody. And then also a lot of these teams, including Georgia, they do open tryouts for walk-ons. They'll do walk-on tryouts every preseason. I mean, every team I've ever been around, they do that. Sometime in the middle or early part of August camp, they'll do tryouts and like maybe bring on 2 or 3 guys if they've got room on their roster. But I'll say this, in the new era of college football that's starting up here this upcoming year with the scholarship limits and all that, you're not going to see a lot of Parker Joneses out there anymore. It's going to be kids that can actually contribute.
Well, also with a haircut like that, you're not a cornerback. He's a cornerback. You can't. I've never seen somebody fast with that haircut. He's white and with that haircut, no chance.
He reminded me a lot of like Will Muschamp because Will Muschamp looked like that, like playing football as well. And he was a good football player. Same with Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart was a really good linebacker at Georgia, but like you would
linebacker,
see him, like, that's
not a cornerback. Player? This guy is supposed to be a cornerback. Like Cooper DeJean's the only white corner. I mean, when he came out, they were like, "Why he's white? We cannot believe it." There's no chance this kid. And I hope he like bounces back and has a good career. I'm sure he'll play. If he wants to play, he'll play at a smaller school. I think maybe he's a legacy kid though. Like maybe his parent or something played there. But okay, let's talk about that game for a second. Now, it's right. Everybody's just jumping all over the SEC, and they have their chance now. Okay, if you're going to take your shots because everybody's doing it. Not you, but everybody's doing it. SEC sucks. SEC sucks. Does the SEC suck?
No, it's just not as good as it once was. And it hasn't been the last 2 years. And for that matter, college football this year, when we look at the quote unquote elite teams, say the last 4 teams in the playoff right now, I wouldn't say that any of those teams, maybe one of them, Ohio State, matches up really with any of the previous teams we've seen in previous years, even the most recent years. I wrote this in my column about Notre Dame after that game. That I believe, and I know a lot of other people are saying this too, and I don't think it's hyperbole, that the era of SEC speed and the athleticism and having that just absolute dominance over the other conferences, that's over. And not necessarily because it's the fault of the SEC. It's because of the transfer portal, because of NIL. It's spread out talent more than ever. As I've said before, there's more talent than ever among the big schools, but it's more spread out than ever. So what you're going to get is games like this where Notre Dame beats Georgia because Georgia's just not as good as it was in the previous years. Same with Alabama, 4 losses this year. And you look at Notre Dame, I think they got great coaches, but look at every point that was scored in that game. It was by transfers. Like Notre Dame's never been that type of program in the last couple of years to just go, let's get transfers in and depend on them. No, they had to do that. And that's the way college football has been trending. And every player that contributed significant moments in that game were transfers. And in fact, most of them, if not all of them that scored in that game are transfers that just arrived this past offseason. You got Riley Leonard at quarterback. Jayden Harrison, the kid who returned the kickoff for a touchdown, he was at Marshall. Bo Collins, who caught the touchdown pass, transfer from Clemson. Times have changed. And the SEC's days of having exclusivity to the athletes in the South are over. Those kids now are going up north even more than they have in the past. And I think that will continue. And what's really going to hurt the SEC, in my opinion, even further potentially, is that all the money in NIL with boosters and everything is up north in these Big Ten schools. They have the bigger boosters. They have the bigger NIL collectives than anybody in the SEC. And that is what's going to attract this talent even more so over these next 2 or 3 years, because now everybody's paying $22 million a year. And then on top of that, people are going to be paying NIL money on top of that. And the Big Ten schools have the deeper pockets, the bigger donors. And I think that could potentially sink the SEC even further.
And the SEC can't stockpile like they did because it's so easy to leave if you're like the old Georgia teams where they had 3 NFL running backs. Even go back. We could do this all day with all these SEC teams, the Georgias, the Alabamas. You can't do that because if you're third string and you're awesome, you're just not going to sit. You're going to go somewhere else. And so, again, the depth will not be there anywhere, but everywhere will have better ones because the big schools aren't able to hold 3 ones.
You can't hold them. And, that thing with Georgia and Alabama is they would hold them and then develop them in their system so that by year 2, year 3, not only are they obviously ready to play, but they also understand the system and they've been playing in it in practice for 2 years. So they're ready to start and not just start, but excel in the system. Now these kids are going, I'm not starting after a year. I'm going to go transfer elsewhere. And they don't quite get the development. I mean, you could say I've been coached the last 2 or 3 years, but you're being coached by 2 or 3 different coaches. Everybody does things differently. And I think that's going to start showing up too, Bobby, is that we're going to see players that just aren't as refined technique-wise and fundamentally as some of these programs. And if you're a program like Georgia, what Georgia's trying to do right now is they believe that they can bring the kids in and maybe not like they have in the past where you say you got 3 guys, 3 deep and keep them on campus all 3-4 years. But they believe if they can just do 2, they could still do that. They're still focusing on maybe we can keep enough kids here and develop them and bring them up the system. But man, that is so difficult to do without paying those kids more. I mean, if you're going to do that, if you're a Georgia at this point, you're going to be like, we got to pay our backup, 2 times what he's going to be potentially making elsewhere just to keep him on campus.
Let's go to the Texas game. And I'm a big believer that kickers need to be like CIA agents. They don't need to be noticed for being any different because when they mess up, and this Auburn guy has long hair,
curly hair.
It's just too much. It's too much if you're a kicker because when you mess up, as a kicker, you need to be normal. You need to be like 5'9", 5'10", skinny. We don't want you to know what your face looks like. You need to stay to the side. Because when it's not, when you have something about you that stands out physically, we will never forget it. I will never forget Sideshow Bob's hair coming out of that helmet, that Texas helmet. So my rule would be like the New York Yankees. No facial hair for kickers. No long hair. No big bold glasses. You're not wearing one sock up or down. You look as generic as possible, like a CIA agent, and you kick the ball because that makes you like it makes me not like them. I don't know. I don't like Texas anyway. I hate Texas. But your thoughts on kickers just need to look standard because just kick the freaking ball.
That's a problem. Like kickers, as soon as they walk on a field, you automatically hate them, even if you're a fan of that team, because you're just like, don't screw this up.
Yeah, because you're going to run it for us. You're right.
Yeah. When a quarterback goes out there, gets subbed in or whatever, you're not going, oh man, here comes the backup. No, sometimes you're thinking, oh yeah, because the hope is always something's better. With the kicker, it's always worse. We're always assuming the worst.
And kickers don't have swag. Kickers don't have swag at all for any reason. A quarterback can have he can have something about him. They're like, dang, he deserves long hair, earring, net chains. That quarterback, that's what he's about. The greatest kicker does not deserve that Auburn guy's hair.
Nah, yeah. Well, that and it didn't help that his coach was like, Steve Sarkisian got up in his face and gave him a little like
Tony Robbins.
Let's kiss here a moment.
Yeah.
I was funny. I was in the Georgia team hotel in the lobby watching the end of that game with a bunch of Georgia fans and player parents and everything. And man, they were cheering hard against Texas. They're like, we do not want to see Texas for a 3rd time this year on the football field if they advance in the playoffs. And of course, Georgia doesn't have to worry about that now. But when Bert Auburn was missing those kicks, it was as if they were Texas fans. They were going, oh my God. Like, even though they wanted him to miss those kicks, they're like, oh my God. So it's just something inherent in all of us, I think, with football. It's just like, it just changed. Kickers change our attitude. Because I almost think we see them as like the nerd on the field. Like, this band nerd doesn't deserve to be on the field.
Be the nerd, though. Yes, you need to be the nerd and not the long-haired, Yeah. Okay, so let's do this
Hey, so real quick, I want to bring this up.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm ready.
You see this? The kicker, I don't know what team it was, so forgive me. I just came to my mind. The kicker went out during halftime this past week to warm up while the band was still on the field.
I saw that.
And he was trying to kick balls between like the drum line and the tuba section.
Yeah.
And the fans went nuts on him. They went after him. Usually everybody just hates the band. They'll attack the band, but they went after that kicker. So again, kickers, you can't do anything right. I mean, but if it was a defensive tackle out there warming up and he knocked a trombone player down just as a tackle,
that's showbiz, baby.
Like, yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah, that's showbiz, baby. It's like punt, and just we'll stay on this for just one more second. Like, I hate, the worst job would be a punter because nobody ever wants to see you, even your own team. A kicker, yeah, you're like, you're going to ruin this. We know it. There's a negative feeling. But if you ever have to see your punter, that's in a negative situation. Like, think about that. You're only on the field whenever your own team does not want to see you. That sucks to be a punter. I'd probably be a punter and a kicker. And I would have my hair cut short and I'd be in contacts. I'd be as low-key generic as possible. Okay, so Ohio State looks ungodly good now. Like, they figured it out. I don't know. They're gonna dog walk Texas, I feel like. But
yeah,
if Ohio State just plays to what they're kind of capable of, can anybody stop them?
I like Notre Dame's defense potentially against them.
Their cornerbacks are really good. Notre Dame does have,
Yeah, that's the one like matchup I see remaining in this playoff that could challenge Ohio State. I don't think Penn State matches up well at all with Ohio State. They played earlier this year. It was a quote unquote low scoring game. Ohio State won 20-13. Penn State missed a lot of opportunities that game, but so did Ohio State. And I think that got overlooked. And with that being quote unquote a neutral site, the national championship game, instead of it being at Happy Valley like it was earlier this year, that's just not a good matchup. Also, Ohio State wasn't playing anywhere near as well as it is right now. I think this Ohio State team, Bobby, reminds me a lot of, say, like a superstar NBA team that just goes through the motions in the regular season. And then once it comes playoff time, they just go off. They tap into that something special that's in them. And we all know, oh, yeah, that's why they're the richest roster in college football, because they've got the best players and they've turned it on when they had to. And, I reversed a week or so ago my pick for Oregon, Ohio State, because I saw how Ohio State played in that Tennessee game, and then also talked to some people around the program about how they were doing some things differently offensively. And they were just like, we're just got to stop shying away from throwing the ball to Jeremiah Smith. He's the best player in all of college football, so we're going to throw it to him, even though he's a freshman. They got away from that a little bit near the end of the season. And boy, he's tearing it up now. And Oregon just had no answer for him. And no one in this playoff, I think, is going to be able to slow him down other than Notre Dame. Notre Dame's got the best corners in all of college football, not just this playoff, and they could slow them down. My question, though, is can Notre Dame actually score enough points if they were to meet in the national championship game? Because that offense, it's good for maybe 3 touchdowns in a game, but good luck getting 4 or 5 out of them. And I think they'll beat Ohio State at this point, the way they're chugging along. You might end up having to score that 4th touchdown late in the game. And I don't know if anybody's equipped in the playoff remaining to do that.
I feel like Penn State and Notre Dame is a better matchup for Penn State to actually win the game and then get run. Because I think Penn State can beat Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame's a 1.5 point favorite. Is that right? Are they a point favorite? I think I looked last night. I think that seems to be a pretty good matchup. The Ohio State-Texas game. I hate Texas so much. And I think what has avoided Ohio State from being the big bad villain is those 2 losses during the season. And it's kept everybody off of the $20 million. And it comes up occasionally. But because they had 2 losses, because they lost to Oregon middle of the season, they lost again to Michigan, it's kept them from being the big villain. Because had they been undefeated the whole time, I think that would have been the storyline. 20 plus million. But those losses have made them, I won't say likable, but not near as hateable.
Well, also, you have a program under a head coach who hasn't won the big one, Ryan Day. He has struggled in top 5 games, and now they're finally winning them. So in a lot of ways, he's as much of an underdog as you can be at a blue blood program that's paying football players $20+ million. And you just lost 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago against rival Michigan at home. So people are just like, this Ryan Day is not good or whatever. I mean, he's good. It's just that he kind of gets in his own way at times, and he's not getting in the way right now. He's letting that talent play loose and play the style that they need to play to win. And it's just so crazy. I mean, back in June or July, the question for me, and I talked to Ross Bjork, the Ohio State AD, about this and wrote a column on it. And it was, what happens if Ohio State loses to Michigan for a fourth straight year? It was thought of unheard of at that point because Michigan we thought was going to be average or bad. Ohio State had the richest roster in college football. And he said very much kind of what he said after this last loss against Michigan, that you have to take the big picture into consideration. It's not just one loss against Michigan anymore. In this 12-team playoff era, you can lose to Michigan and still make the playoff. And so what if you win a national championship? I don't think a lot of fans will care about them losing to Michigan. But the problem is that Michigan fans can still hang that over your head all off season. Yeah, you won the national championship, buddy, but guess what? We beat you, and we got you at the big house this upcoming year. So,
and they won it the year before too. Yeah, and they won it the year before, which also, it's like semi-sweet chocolate chips to me. Like, I like chocolate chips, and if I see them in the fridge, I'm like, oh, I'm eating some of these chocolate chips, and I'm like, I found chocolate chips and I get to eat them, but they're kind of like semi-sweet. That's kind of like if Ohio State wins a national title, they got chocolate chips. That's pretty cool, but they're semi-sweet because Michigan beat them and had won the title the year before. And you're right. I don't hate Ohio State as much as I should. I hope they stomp. I hope Texas quits. I hope Texas folds the program. They get beat so bad next week. Okay, final thing, and you can push back on my theory. First of all, everyone's like, you don't want the bye week because the rest. But 3 of those teams that lost were the underdogs. So more so than it was the bye week. I think mostly it wasn't the bye week. It was they got beat by better teams. Your thoughts on the rest and the people going, the bye week's what lost it for them?
Yeah, the favorites won for the most part. I mean, they did. And even in a game like Notre Dame and Georgia, it was like a 1 or 2 point spread. So who won in that game? I don't think the bye affected anybody substantially. And in fact, I could argue that Notre Dame, if they had the bye, would have beaten Georgia worse. And the reason why I say that is because Notre Dame lost their best defensive player in the first round against Indiana. Riley Mills, their defensive tackle, led them in sacks, and he's a big piece for them, not just defensively, but also strategically and schematically against a team like Georgia that was going to try and run the ball up the middle. They didn't have him in that game, and I think if he's in that game, that's probably even worse for Georgia. So, yeah, I don't buy into the bye thing right now. But what I do buy into, Bobby, is that we got to reseed the bracket. We can't do this crap where we reward the 4 top conference champions with the first round bye. So you get like the number 10 team or whatever with the first round bye with one of the top 4 seeds. Don't do that. Just put the teams in and rank them 1 through 12. If you're number 4 and you're Notre Dame, you get a first round bye. We got to get rid of that. I mean, in the NCAA men's basketball tournament, they don't give conference champions a first round bye. They just go, you have a spot in the tournament. They don't say you'll have one of the top 4 seeds or one of the top 8 seeds or anything like that. They're just saying you're guaranteed a spot in the playoff. Do it that way now. Guarantee them a spot in the playoff, but rank them the way they are. And if they're outside the top 12, have them bump out that last team at number 12, because usually it's going to be a team that we're all wondering should be in the playoff anyway. So that's what they need to do.
Brandon Marcello, follow him on Instagram at Brandon Marcello. You can read his articles at 247sports.com, 247sports.com. Brandon, talk to you soon. Thank you so much for talking with us, and we'll see you next week.
All right, see you, Bobby.
All right, see you, buddy.